Speaking of Marianne Williamson, so if you have not seen, it has now been announced that Marianne Williamson is running for president and will primary challenge Joe Biden. I know we have interviewed her and other people have, but at that point it wasn't announced. It is now officially announced. Now, let me pull this over here. We're going to talk about a couple of things. First, I'm going to show you the actual announcement. So we're going to see that. Then we're going to talk about the possibility of someone else actually challenging Joe Biden as well. That was also announced. So we're going to talk about that and how that could affect her. And then I'm going to show you some of the problematic rhetoric with this whole FDR Democrat thing, which Marianne Williamson does mention. Other people have mentioned this as well. And I think it's important that when you talk about the days of FDR and the New Deal, I think it is very important that you mentioned some of the problems with the New Deal and the people that were affected, and how you want to do something like that, but you want to make it better. You don't want to make some of those same decisions that were made under the New Deal. So we're going to talk about that tonight as well. Let's go ahead and get into this clip here. Shout out to Case Study QB for this clip. Here's the announcement. Now, MSNBC did cover it. So you do have one mainstream media network or outlet that has decided to cover it. That's probably the first hurdle to get over, right? If you're running, you're trying to primary sitting president, that's probably the first hurdle that you need to get over. Is mainstream media even going to acknowledge that you are running? Well, it seems like they are. But listen to what they have to say. Listen to how they frame it.
Heading into 2024, President Biden has drawn his first Democratic challenger. Best-selling self-help author Marianne Williamson has announced her plans to run for president. Williamson, a progressive Democrat, ran for the White House in 2020, but she dropped out of the race just before the primaries and caucuses got underway. Joining us now to discuss this, White House reporter for Bloomberg, Kayla Gardner. All right.
I just want to chime in here and say something. Someone told me the other day that they didn't know that Marianne Williamson ran for president in 2020. That was kind of surprising to me. I was surprised that that wasn't known to everyone. But yeah, she definitely ran in 2020 and she was on the debate stage. And she did have some memorable moments on the debate stage. So I was kind of surprised to hear that they didn't know that. It's interesting.
Kayla, Marianne Williamson aside, does the White House anticipate other candidates jumping into the Democratic primary the longer that Joe Biden does not say he's running?
I don't think the White House ever expected to get a serious challenger. And I wonder if they would even consider Marianne Williamson a serious challenger at that. And I think they really risk here giving her too much attention. But it is going to be somewhat of...
Let's backtrack. Look at what she already said. See, she's already showing you. Listen to what she says about what they risk. Listen to this.
If they would even consider Marianne Williamson a serious challenger at that. And I think they really risk here giving her too much attention.
Boom. These are the kind of things that used to be a little bit more hidden. They used to be a little bit more covert about it, not as obvious. But she just said this right out in the open on MSNBC. The White House shouldn't risk giving her too much attention. What'd that tell you? So she's openly letting you know that typically she should be suppressed. Don't focus on her too much. Because if you focus on her too much, then it may get out to too many people that someone is actually challenging Joe Biden. So let's not give her too much attention so that the majority of Americans are not aware. If that doesn't let you know how corrupt the system is at play, if it doesn't let you know just how rigged the system is, I don't know what else to tell you. Because if you don't get the approval of mainstream media, the exception was Trump. Because remember, when Trump was running in the beginning, remember Fox News they were laughing at Donald Trump. But once he became the nominee, things changed. But if you don't get the approval of mainstream media, if they're not covering you, if they're not talking about you, it's going to be really difficult for you to win. And this is the same problem that we have with third-party candidates that run for president, right? Mainstream media doesn't give them coverage. They usually just ignore them. But if they get to a certain polling percentage, then they have to acknowledge them, which happened with Jill Stein. At one point, Jill Stein was polling at like 7%. You only need to get to 5% to get the federal funding. So once she got to like that 7%, then mainstream media decided, okay, now we got to smear her, right? But she's just letting you know right now, don't give her too much attention. And they say we have a democracy. Okay, let's go on.
But it is going to be somewhat of an annoyance to have her out there openly criticizing Joe Biden. She's already said she's disagreed with.
She letting you know right now, back it up. This is so blatant.
I think they really risk here giving her too much attention, but it is going to be somewhat of an annoyance to have her out there openly criticizing Joe Biden.
It's going to be an annoyance. It's going to be annoying to have someone criticize Joe Biden. Listen to the vocabulary. This is what I keep trying to tell you guys. Vocabulary is incredibly important. So she said it will be an annoyance to have someone out there openly challenging Joe Biden, criticizing Joe Biden. Because what they really want you to do, if you have criticisms of Joe Biden, you're supposed to do that behind closed doors. You're not supposed to do it openly. And that's exactly why you see even like members of the squad and Bernie Sanders, that's why they won't even criticize Joe Biden openly. Probably behind closed doors, they do. So she letting you know how the game works, people. Lay it all out for people. But she said it will be annoying to have someone doing that. Why is it annoying? As much as the Democratic Party says that we need to value our democracy, we need to have a true democracy, but you don't want anybody to be challenged? Let's go on. The Oracle says an annoyance like a fly buzzing around the room. I know. Like what?
Already said she's disagreed with his view on the economy, which we know is always a huge issue for voters. It was in the midterms and will likely be again in 2024. And so they risk giving her attention, but also having to address this very real criticism that Biden has faced, that he is disconnected with everyday Americans who are going to the grocery store and seeing high prices on eggs and continue to feel the effects of inflation. And so it's certainly an annoyance to them.
It's annoying because this is the thing, you guys. This woman is letting you know the Democratic Party, they don't want you to point out the fact that people are still suffering in this country economically. They don't want that to be referenced. They don't want people to say that because Joe Biden has been denying that. State of the Union address, he said the economy's doing great. We know that's not true. But other people aren't saying it. So they think it will be annoying for someone to come in and admit the truth. But they say we have a democracy. This is why I tell you both parties are trash.
But I don't think we're expecting any other prominent Democrats, especially anyone holding public office, to jump into this race.
You're right. People should just remember the role Jill Stein played in 2016 for an example of a nuisance that someone on the left can be for a Democrat.
You see how they just slide that in there? I don't understand why more Americans don't wake up to this, guys. Look at what he said at the end about Jill Stein. I think people will remember what a nuisance. Listen to this. Let me turn this up. Okay.
Office to jump into this race.
You're right. People should just remember the role Jill Stein played in 2016 for an example of a nuisance that someone on the left can be for a Democrat.
The nuisance that someone on the left can be for a Democrat. A nuisance. This is why I say we don't have a true democracy in this country. You should be able to challenge people. And I don't agree with Marianne Williamson on some of the issues. And I wouldn't support Marianne Williamson anyway, because she's definitely running through the two-party system. But the thing is like, Should she not be able to challenge him? Should anyone not be able to run against Joe Biden? This idea that just because he is the sitting president, that he should not be challenged, where does this type of thinking come from? This is the country we live in. I remember Jill Stein was such a nuisance. Why? Because she was speaking truth to power? Because she wasn't a part of the two-party system? Because she actually cared about the climate and the environment? Because she wants to end the wars? That's a nuisance? Because she wasn't taking corporate money? That's the nuisance. The system is inherently corrupt. But there is something that Marianne does need to worry about. And I saw this earlier today. Let me make sure I dive into. We'll get to that in a second. Let's go to the article first. I'm saving that for last. So The Hill has also announced that Marianne Williamson confirmed she will run for president 2024. Marianne, a prominent progressive who ran for president in 2020, confirmed in an interview published Thursday that she will run again for the Democratic nomination for president in 2024. Someone was asking me earlier in the chat if it was going to be independent or Democrat. It's Democratic nomination, which is exactly what I had predicted. So she'll be running through the Democratic Party. That would put her in a Democratic primary against Joe Biden, who has not announced his own plans, but is widely expected to run for re-election next year. Hold on to that piece, because I have an update on that. I wouldn't be running for president if I didn't believe I could contribute to harnessing the collective sensibility that I feel is our greatest hope at this time. That's what Marianne Williamson told the Middle News Service, which is run by Northwestern University, in an exclusive interview. No other Democrats have officially waded into the race yet, making Williamson the first. Williamson previously teased an important announcement that she said she would be making on March 4th, which had been speculated as a presidential announcement. That's another thing, too. I did notice that this announcement arrived before March 4th. So there could be another announcement that's coming March 4th. I don't know. Williamson gained notoriety during the 2020 presidential race, especially during the first several presidential primary debates, where some of her spiritual remarks won her fans online. However, her campaign lasted 1 year and she dropped out in January 2020. During her interview with Middle News Service, she also criticized the DNC's decision to change the early presidential primary schedule, which places South Carolina as the first state in the lineup. South Carolina is where Biden placed first in 2020, is widely credited for helping boost his momentum in the Democratic primary. Let's all remember that. There's a reason why they made that first state South Carolina. It's not just because of diversity, because if it was just because of diversity, they could have easily picked a state like Maryland. They could have easily picked a state like New Jersey. It ain't nothing to do with that. It had to do with the fact that that was the state that put him over the loop. How can you claim to be a champion of democracy when your own process is so undemocratic? That's what Williamson told the news outlet. The news comes as polling has often shown Democrats less favorable of a Biden re-election bid. One poll from the Associated Press, for example, saw only 37% of members of his party polled supportive of a second Biden term. 37%. Biden was expected to make an announcement that he will be running for re-election in the coming weeks, says multiple sources, though it's unclear that might happen, when that might happen. Let's go ahead and get into that for a second. Now, there's something I do want to show you, because I don't know if that's going to happen. Sabs does not know. And apparently, neither does Ro Khanna. Now, listen to this. Now, shout out to Case Study QB for this clip. Growing questions over whether Biden will run in 2024. Listen to this, you guys. Wait for this one. Just wait for it.
Meanwhile, something less important, but eventually impactful for the country is who's going to be the next president of the United States. The one thing we thought almost most of all the intrigue was going to be on is on the right as we wait day by day for more and more contenders to jump in. But then this headline in the Politico popped up yesterday afternoon. Biden may not run, and top Dems are quietly preparing for a plan B. They go on to say that people in the president's orbit say there's no hard deadline or formal processing place for arriving at a launch date. Remember, they thought it was going to be February. Now,
okay, so for those who missed that, they are now saying that Joe Biden may not run. Before people get excited and start dancing, doing the Tootsie Roll and the Cha-Cha Slide, I want to let you know, hold on, because it's not what you think. They're saying that Joe Biden may not run, but there's something else you need to hear.
To 4 people familiar with the president's thinking, a final call has been pushed aside as real-world events intervene. His cloak and dagger trip to Kyiv over the holiday weekend took meticulous planning, and the positive reaction to it was seen internally as providing him with more of a runway to turn back to domestic politics. So they say if he's going to make the message to say he's going to run or not run, it could be in April. But everything's on hold, and quietly behind the scenes, there's a plan B taking shape.
Yeah, and he felt.
Yes, and part of that plan B is that they are already trying to push Kamala Harris. I mentioned this earlier on RBN. They're already trying to push Kamala Harris. She's already made plans to go visit South Carolina. So you know that South Carolina is now the first state in the primary. Why else would she be going there? I want to remind you what's going on right now. We do have the crisis with Russia and Ukraine. Could you imagine Kamala Harris being in charge during that crisis? She's not good on foreign policy. Let's keep it real. But they're already preparing for that behind the scenes. But there's more. Wait. It gets worse.
Yesterday on the stairs, he's 80 years old. People are wondering, is he up for the job for another 4 years?
He could barely talk at the end in that last roundtable.
Right. They said they were originally thinking February. Now they're coalescing maybe around April. It's assumed that he will run in the article, it says, but not decided.
Well, everybody in Biden's circle says he's going to run. So you got to figure there's just an awkward freeze right now. Some people, in the meantime, some people who might run if he wasn't running are strategizing. You know, they're trying to come up with a plan B. But what is very telling, and this is the reason I believe completely with my heart he's running, is he's already staffed up. He's got people on a staff who are getting paychecks. They've also lined up a super PAC. They're going to use Future Forward, which has been used in the past, to put on ads touting the president's agenda. And it's just curious. After a week or so of stories in the political news about Nikki Haley and about Donald Trump going to Palestine, that is to say, and Tim Scott and stuff like that, suddenly Politico comes out and does a story about how the Democrats are wondering whether or not Joe's going to run. Joe's going to run.
All right, coming up.
I just said, if he's not going to run, Phil Murphy evidently taking steps, seemed it, aiming at the door, keeping the door open.
He just went to Ukraine.
Gavin Newsom in California's got this huge.
So they're pushing Gavin Newsom's name again. And Gavin Newsom had said, I believe it was like 2 months ago, that he would not run, that he changed his mind. He was considering, but not considering anymore. But they're still pushing his name as though he may run. And there's someone else.
Online presence, got this digital media presence. He's just a terrible governor. And Democratic Governor J.B. Pritzker, keep that in mind. Ro Khanna says if Biden doesn't run, Bernie Sanders will run, and he hasn't ruled out running himself.
Or maybe Amy Klobuchar also is mentioned in the.
Did you hear the last part? He said, Ro Khanna said, this is coming from Ro Khanna. I don't know why Ro Khanna's speaking for Bernie Sanders, but here we are.
Aiming at the door, keeping the door open.
He just went to
Gavin Newsom in California. He's got this huge online presence. He's got this digital media presence. He's just a terrible governor. And Democratic Governor J.B. Pritzker, keep that in mind. Ro Khanna says if Biden doesn't run, Bernie Sanders will run, and he hasn't ruled out running himself.
Or maybe Amy Klobuchar also.
Can't make it up. Can't make this up. So Ro Khanna has said that if Biden doesn't run, that Bernie Sanders will be running. And they mentioned Amy Klobuchar. Amy Klobuchar is she needs to go sit down. Handle things in Minnesota first, Amy. Handle the police situation that you were a part of in Minnesota first. But Bernie Sanders again? Why? Why would you run again at this point? 3 times? So Bernie Sanders is actually considering taking working class people money again, because he will, let's be real, just to sell them out to the Democrat establishment. And if people do this again, I don't know what to tell you if you fall for this again. I really don't know what to say. But for Bernie Sanders to even consider it again, it's disgusting. And there's something else that you need to think about as well. If that happens, if Biden does not run and Bernie Sanders run, now you have Marianne Williamson and Bernie Sanders. So what happens to the support? In reference to the progressives, those who still believe in doing this progressive strategy, what happens to the support? You are going to split the progressive vote. That's what is going to happen. I'm not voting for either one of them. But for people who do want to, they're going to split the progressive vote. A lot of people still like Bernie Sanders. You'd be surprised. I'm not one of them, but a lot of people still like him. He still has the highest rating among senators. So what would happen then? What would you do? There's people in independent media who have gotten behind Marianne's campaign and who want Marianne to run and support Marianne's race. And some of those people came from the Bernie Sanders movement. So if Bernie Sanders runs again and you have Marianne Williamson running, what would happen? Would Marianne drop out? Because Bernie wouldn't. Hit that like button, guys. If you haven't had a chance to do so, go ahead and give it a Hulk smash. That helps me out with the algo. But there's more, because I can't. I'm not even done yet. I'm not even done. Please go ahead and answer that poll when you get the opportunity. Because one of the criticisms that's been made about Marianne potential running for president is the foreign policy. All right. So that's where, for me, it was a no-go. The 2-state solution, I do not support. I do not support continuing this war with Russia and Ukraine. I think we need to be calling for peace. I don't agree. I don't support it on the foreign policy. I'm not there. I think she has good platforms on issues like reparations. She's really good on that. I think she's really good on the healthcare issue. And she came around on that. She didn't always agree with Medicare for all. She came around on that. And she's been out there in the streets, like during the rallies, speaking and participating in those too as well. But she's running through the Democratic Party. And I'm not supporting any candidates running in the 2-party system. Those days for me were done. When I voted in November, I voted for the Green Party candidates that were on the ballot, and everything else I left blank. And then I voted for the ballot initiatives, and that was it. That's it. Now, there's another thing I want to address here. This tweet here from Marianne, she said, FDR Democrats, we need to talk about this because Marcus and I did a deep dive about this whole FDR Democrat thing on this show. But there's something I want to show you, because this whole New Deal thing, you got to know what's really happening here. She said, FDR Democrats work unapologetically and unabashedly to support working people of the United States. Keep this in mind, this working people part, because we're going to show you something. But we are only part of the Democratic Party today as the corporatist wing of the party is all for making people feel better, but only so far as it doesn't challenge profit maximization from their major corporate donors. See, corporatist wing of the party, this piece right here, the entire party is corporate. The Democratic Party is a corporation. They actually argued in court that they could pick candidates from behind a closed room. The whole party's corporate. See, I used to think this too. I used to believe that, this part of the Democratic Party is corporate. And then this side over here, where you have the ones that were progressive, or if they still call themselves progressive, they're the ones that were grassroots, so they're not a part of it. No, they're all a part of it. Both parties are owned. They're all owned by corporations. So there's no corporate wing of the party. The whole party is corporate. She goes on to say that Wall Street clearly still owns both major parties. Right. So there's no corporatist wing. It's the entire party. And while the Republicans are definitely much worse, that cannot remain our excuse forever. The point should not be to help people survive an unjust system. It should be to end an unjust system. In the richest country in the world, the economy shouldn't be so hard for the average American to survive. We need more than the alleviation of stress. We need fundamental economic reform. That is the agenda that will beat the Republicans in 2024. Do I agree that we need economic reform? See, I'm going to frame this a little bit differently, because I told you guys, from what I've seen from my experience, reforms don't work. Reforms don't work with policing. Reforms didn't work in the education system. Reforms don't work in the healthcare system. You have to tear those systems down and you have to build something new. And so when you talk about economic reform, I would actually phrase it as capitalism has to go. The capitalist system is the reason why you have a poverty issue. It's the reason why you have a homelessness issue. It's the reason why workers are exploited. It's the reason why CEOs were making double their net worth during the pandemic, when other people were being laid off and were trying to figure out how they were going to pay their rent. It is a capitalist system. And what I've noticed oftentimes, and I did support Bernie Sanders, I did support AOC and all the other progressives. I went through that whole progressive movement train. I did support them and I did believe in them. But what I noticed over time is that as long as you are going into a corporate corrupt party, the party is going to own you. You are not going to change the party. That is the way the system is built. That is the way it is designed. And for the people who try to change it, those people are pushed out. Don't believe me? Pick up the phone and call Dennis Kucinich. Pick up the phone and call Cynthia McKinney. And they'll explain to you how the Democratic Party pushed them out because they didn't want to play their game. The people who stay are the ones that go along to get along. And the people who push back are pushed out. But what I learned from that progressive movement is that a lot of the people who said they're social democrats or democratic socialists, it's like they just want to put guardrails on capitalism. They don't really want to give workers, the opportunity to control the means of production. That's socialism. And you can't put guardrails on capitalism. We've tried this throughout the years. Because as long as you have capitalism, somebody somewhere is being exploited, even when it comes to social democracy. So when you look at countries like Denmark, these countries that Bernie Sanders likes to point to, and he says these countries have social democracy. They have healthcare for everybody, yada, yada, yada. Yes, they do. But having lived in Europe, what you also have to understand is that even if the people in that country are not being exploited, oftentimes the exploitation is happening somewhere else. And that's how the people in those countries are getting to benefit. So people in Germany may not benefit, may not be exploited by the social democracy that they have there, but people in the global South might be. You have to talk about that. You have to mention it. Second Thought breaks this down very much so. But you have to call out capitalism. This is why these reforms don't work. Now, the piece up here is what I really want to drive home, this FDR Democrats thing, because oftentimes people are bringing this up too. They're saying we have to go back to the FDR Democrats. We have to do, the New Deal, how this helped everyone, but it didn't help everyone. And there were problems with the New Deal that actually hurt some people. So I think it's important when you mention like FDR Democrats and you mention the New Deal, and a lot of people, progressive lane, they go around saying this. I think it's important to mention how there were also flaws of the New Deal that still affect certain people today, and how that should have never happened, and how that needs to be prevented going forward. Who was affected? What are some of the flaws? Marcus and I did a whole breakdown about FDR's New Deal. And I would continue to hear, and it's mainly like a lot of the white leftists in independent media, they love to say this phrase, FDR's New Deal and FDR Democrat. That's what we want back. That didn't help Black people, though. It didn't help indigenous people. And one of the things that came from the New Deal was the housing issue, which we still have a problem with today. Let's get into that. Because in this clip, they are going to explain to you that the New Deal was really more so about saving capitalism, not saving people. And it damn sure wasn't really trying to save Black people. Listen to this.
This community in these homes are white, unless you're a servant.
The subdivision is called Ladera, and the racist covenants were attached to the deeds of all 500-some homes here. The rules are no longer enforceable or even legal, but they've been on the books since the neighborhood was laid out 70 years ago. And they help illustrate how so many of America's suburbs ended up segregated.
It hurts. It hurts to be told you're not welcome. Forget welcome, you're not allowed.
It so offended me, I thought, well, this has to be offending everyone who buys property here.
So some of Ladera's residents set out to understand how this happened. And it turned out these relics of segregation grew out of a historical moment more often remembered for progressivism and inclusion.
I pledge myself.
So this is FDR. And this came out of progressivism, which was supposed to be part of inclusion. And a lot of people say this FDR came in and he saved the people and saved the workers. No, he saved capitalism. And the only reason why the New Deal was implemented is because the workers rose up and pushed back, because the people pushed back. But even then, not everybody got those benefits. And some people actually were hurt by it. Let's go on.
To a new deal for the American people.
The New Deal programs launched between 1933 and the end of the Second World War transformed society. But Black Americans reaped far fewer benefits from these programs than white Americans.
The New Deal expanded government capacities in a way that provided economic rights for people, the right to capital, the right to a job, the right to health care, the right to old age pension. What was problematic is that that right was not inclusive.
One of
There
the
you
clearest
go.
examples of this came when New Deal agencies began insuring affordable home loans. Before backing the loans, agencies mapped communities across the country, dividing them into zones judged to be higher or lower risk for banks. Records show a key factor federal mapmakers used to determine this perceived risk was race. This practice, called redlining, largely cut people of color off from affordable borrowing.
It's not a case.
So what you have to understand is that that is where redlining came from. It came from the New Deal. And I hear a lot of people, they'll mention this in reference to voting. They'll say, oh, the redlining and da-da-da-da. But then they'll praise the New Deal. And that's not to say there weren't good things that came from the New Deal. But how can you leave out what the New Deal did to Black people, what the New Deal did to Indigenous people? How can you leave out the redlining? And this includes, and I'm sorry, we got to say this includes people in legacy left independent media who leave this out. And so either you don't know the history or you're leaving it out intentionally. So nobody getting up there trying to tell me we're going to bring back the FDR Democrat. Nah, bud, there are problems there. There are problems there. And you need to call it out.
That you just had these bigoted bankers and these bigoted homeowners. The federal government was culpable. Black people, by design, were excluded from this benefit.
Yep.
It's exactly what happened in Ladera. In the late 1940s, a mixed-race group of about 100 families banded together to build cheap homes near Stanford University. Workers, teachers, and professors, including the novelist Wallace Stegner, formed a cooperative to buy and transform a tract of hilly ranch land into an affordable suburb named Ladera. But the project soon stalled.
No bank would give them the loan to build these homes. The banks wouldn't do it because the Federal Housing Administration wouldn't insure their loans because of these 100 members of the cooperative, 3 were African Americans.
At the time, the Federal Housing Administration explicitly recommended that race restrictions be used in new suburban developments. Its lending manual even included instructions for banning buyers who weren't the race for which new homes were intended.
And this is exactly how Black people were kept out of the suburbs. Again, this came from the New Deal. And a lot of people, they want to talk about rep, but they don't take it all the way back to where it came from. And you even see some effects of that today. Even now, I went through the home buying process. Even now, there's still certain neighborhoods, whether you have the credit score, whether you have the down payment or not, and a lot of you in the chat, you know this, there's still certain neighborhoods and certain realtors that will not sell to certain people who are of a certain complexion. Even if it lists that the house is on the market, all of a sudden when you show up, oh, we sold that house already. Then your white friend goes in and, oh, magically the house is still on the market. So the redlining that came from the New Deal, it was a way that prevented Black people from getting into those suburbs, thus prevented Black people from becoming homeowners. And without the home ownership, you don't have the opportunity to establish some type of generational wealth and to increase your net worth. So I'm not too fond of the whole, I'm an FDR Democrat. We need a New Deal Democrat. I'm not too fond of it. We'll play a little bit more here and then we'll move on.
Segregation that this program alone created is responsible for much of the racial inequality we have in this country today.
Unable to find financing, the Ladera Cooperative disbanded and sold the land to a private developer who built Ladera as a whites-only community.
Yep.
By the 1950s, this mix of federal policy and private discrimination left few options for Black Americans seeking homes in this part of California.
my dad got involved with the Palo Alto Stanford branch of the NAACP. They were proving that there was housing discrimination. And it was notorious here, very subtle, but it was notorious. My dad could easily pass for white. My mom was brown skinned. You knew who she was. It was actually something that was very painful for my mother, because my dad would go to rent an apartment or to buy property. They'd say, wonderful. He'd say, let me bring my wife. And as soon as she came back with him, they would say, no, this is no longer available.
When my parents came here from Alabama, they figured, okay, this is a nice area. We don't have to worry about our kids getting lynched. There's not open racism, but they didn't factor in that there was a slew of hidden racism.
Yep.
About 9 miles from Ladera, Elwyn Rayner's family,
that's referred to as covert racism, by the way, the hidden racism.
They opened up this service station in one of the only areas open to Black American property buyers, now known as East Palo Alto.
The African Americans were guided to this area. Any houses on the other side of the freeway were considered to be out of their price range. Or
see what I'm saying? This is what they'll do. They'll direct you to a certain area. I had a friend of mine at the time, well, he is still white. Damn. I was about to say at the time he was white. He is still white. His wife is Black. When they first moved here, he told me that the realtors kept trying to direct them to the neighborhoods where it was only Black people and would not show them houses in the other suburban neighborhoods. That's intentional. Every now and then you might get lucky and you get a good realtor who's not looking at all that jazz, but it happens. It happens.
The interest rate alone would kill that dream of them owning a house because they couldn't afford it. It's like they say you're on the wrong side of the tracks. For us, it was the wrong side of the freeway.
For decades, East Palo Alto and neighboring Bellhaven were unincorporated communities without a city government, where housing shared space with heavy industry, and residents enjoyed few of the amenities available to the majority white suburbs, like Palo Alto, Menlo Park, or Ladera.
We had roads that were badly paved. We had many a neighborhood that did not have sidewalks. We had a school district that was grossly underfunded. We were walking in the middle of the street instead of walking on sidewalks. We had bad lighting. We had bad water. Mm-hmm. We didn't even have a city. We didn't have a place where we could go and complain even.
Notice how he said they had bad water. So see, this is another thing. You're put into the communities. You're prevented from going into the communities where you can have more resources and you can have clean water. So therefore, you're pushed into the communities that have bad water, where you have the environmental issues. And you know what else that means? That means that your life expectancy drops. That happens here in Boston as well. If you go to Roxbury, between the intersection of Roxbury and the wealthy side of the South End, if you're standing on that side of the street where you're in the South End, the wealthy side, because there's two different parts, your life expectancy is higher. As soon as you cross that street and you go over to Roxbury, your life expectancy drops by 30 years. So I'm not going to play the entire video in here, but if you want to see the full video, the name of this video is called Whites Only Suburbs, How the New Deal Shut Out Black Homebuyers. That's just one of them. Another one of the issues was the GI Bill. Like, there were so many ways where the New Deal actually shut out Black people and Native Americans. So I think, I get what Marianne's saying when she mentions that, but I think it's important to mention now, FYI, that New Deal didn't include everybody, so we need to do something better. I think it's important to add that piece. But that whole, I'm a FDR, I don't do that. No, I don't do that. You didn't lost me with that one, not doing it. But hopefully you learned something here tonight if you didn't know that before tonight. Now you do. Going to go to some of the chats here. Mary said, sorry, not sorry. I do not trust Marianne on her stands. Thanks for the super chat, Snort. Klobuchar needs to go rent an outhouse in Tasmania. Okay. The Oracle. Bernie Sanders wants to prove that he is the best sheepdog and shepherd, which is different from the good shepherd. Mario says, I'm not wasting a single penny or minute on a Democratic candidate this cycle. I'll be at the park tabling for solidarity movements. Thank you for the super chat, Andrew. Joe Biden is running. Jill Biden confirmed it. Thank you for the super chat, Egg64. Landlords are actively turning down Section 8 vouchers these days, even during a pandemic. So this absolutely tracks. Bingo. Angela says, Galesburg, Illinois has enacted program to prioritize homes for families of people who were discriminated against for housing. Such a tiny step, so much more is needed. I agree, Angela. And thank you for the super chat, Lorez. Redlining and no GI Bill for free college ownership and college are the two main ways to get and hold generational wealth. Black Americans excluded from both. This is the point that I really want to drive home, because it's not just about the 40 acres and a mule that did not happen, that was promised by General Sherman after slaves were freed. It's not just about that. It's about everything else that happened after that. How when there were times where we could have been given those opportunities, we were prevented from having it. So yes, thank you so much for saying that, Lorez. Absolutely. All right, so here's those poll results, you guys. Would you vote for Marianne Williamson if she changed her position on Israel and Ukraine? So that's her position with Israel, Palestine was the two-state solution, and with Russia and Ukraine was to continue to send Ukraine money. What I'm asking is if she were to flip that and to say, to call for peace and to stop sending money to Ukraine, and also with Israel and Palestine, to not support the two-state solution and to support BDS. But she doesn't support those. And that's why I asked those questions, because some people said she had to change her views on foreign policy. Now, this poll, it looks very different than it did before when I went live. So would you vote for Marianne if she changed her position on Israel and Ukraine? 15% of you said yes. 63% said no, and 23% said maybe. Yeah, this is definitely, how many votes is this? Eric, 557 votes. Okay. Yeah, it definitely changed, because when I went live, it was actually the yes choice was actually in the lead. So things definitely changed. I wouldn't be surprised if some people jumped on just to vote and peaced out. I'm just being honest. Well, Marianne, I don't know if you're watching this, but that's a something. That's a something there.